Hi there, and welcome to Ian's Ngauge channel. I'm Ian. In a previous video, I explained that my Dapol Class 50 had stopped working, and how, while trying to fix it, one of the bogies had fallen apart as I'd tried to remove it from the chassis. This had left me clueless about how to put the bogie back together again, and with parts going everywhere, I didn't even know whether or not I'd recovered all of the pieces to do the job. This is where I need to say a huge thank you to the model railway community on YouTube, as between us, we've managed to get the Class 50 running again. And in this video, I'm going to show you how. So for those who didn't see the previous video, let's do a quick recap while we watch the Class 50 circulate the test track with some Pullman coaches back when it was working. There were basically two issues with the Class 50. The first was that the loco was dead, and I had no idea what had happened to it. It had worked during a previous running session and had been left on track, which was powered off for about a week. Next time I went to use it, it didn't respond to DCC commands. I tried cleaning the track, checked for a decoder reset, and was in the process of investigating further when the second issue occurred. I'd attempted to remove the bogies, with the aim of ensuring that the pickups were clean. As I wiggled the first bogie around in its housing, I expected it to drop out, like bogies did in other Dapol models such as their Class 27, Class 33 and Class 43. Instead, the bogie fell apart, and bits went flying everywhere. It looked simple enough to fix, but the parts simply didn't want to clip back together again. After taking on board a lot of advice from the community here, I came up with a plan to try and get the loco working again. I decided to rebuild the bogie assembly first. The first thing I did was to contact ngauge, who are the official Dapol service agents. I sent them some photos of the bogie pieces I had, and they confirmed that I had all of the parts necessary to rebuild the bogie. This was excellent news, but didn't alter the fact that after previously trying to clip the parts back together, I'd failed miserably. So I tried again, and this time paid closer attention to what I was doing, and found that I'd failed to notice two key points while reassembling the bogie. The first thing I'd missed was that the cogs of the wheel set axles were friction fitted, and that at least one of them had moved. They were a tight friction fit, but could be adjusted using a bit of pressure. After a bit of fiddling about, I got one of the wheel sets to align with the cogs in the bogie assembly, but I couldn't get it to sit flat. This is where the second thing I'd not taken into account came into play. There were pickups that needed to touch the rear of each wheel before the wheel sets would sit flat, which was necessary before the bogie frame could be clipped back into the bogie. Of course, I then nearly tried to clip it in the wrong way around, but remembered to turn it round at the last minute. The process of aligning the pickups, wheel set, bogie and bogie frame was a fiddly affair, but with the help of a screwdriver and my magnifying helmet, I eventually got there, and the bogie frame finally clipped back into the bogie assembly. Hurrah! Once the bogie assembly had been rebuilt, it was time to tackle the original problem, which was the lack of power. There could be any number of things wrong with the Class 50 electrics, and the only thing to do was to go through as many of them as I could think of or that had been suggested. But first off, I double-checked that the loco was still dead. I did this with my rolling rod connected to the NCE power cab. I don't know what I'd expected to happen, but nothing happened, as rather predictably, the loco was still dead. That meant it was time to get inside the loco. The loco instructions were quite helpful for once, indicating where the clips were located holding the body shell to the chassis. They even recommended inserting thin plastic between the body shell and the chassis in order to separate them, and this is where my trusty guitar picks usually came into play. However, the bodywork was so loosely fitted to the chassis the guitar picks were hardly necessary, and the body shell was easily removed. Once inside, I tried to spot if there was any loose wiring, preventing connection between the pickups and the motor, or the decoder PCB, but all seemed present and correct. The loco contained a Rails Connect Next 18 decoder, which I'd had fitted when I purchased the loco. It seemed to be seated in the socket correctly, but I decided to remove it. I wanted to determine if the motor, the decoder PCB, or the decoder itself was at fault. So next I decided to convert the loco back to DC operation. To do this, all that was required was to insert a Next 18 blanking plate into the decoder socket. I then took the loco minus the body shell back to the rolling road and tested it using my Gauge Master Combi analog controller. I was quite pleased when the wheels started turning as I increased power, and the lights lit up. The loco ran in reverse too, so happy days. This proved that the pickups, motor and the PCB were all working, so the problem must be with the Next 18 decoder, right? I wanted a definitive answer, so I decided to test the Rails Connect decoder with my newly acquired ESU Decoder Tester. I inserted the decoder into the Next 18 socket of the tester. I then activated the lights and tried a couple of functions. I was astonished that this appeared to work. Next I put the motor through its paces. It speeded up, slowed down and changed direction. It all worked. There didn't seem to be anything wrong with the decoder at all. Therefore, I decided to remove the blanking plate, and then refitted the Next 18 decoder back into the loco. The theory I had was that there must be some sort of problem with the DCC side of the loco's PCB. Once fitted, it was back to the rolling roads to see what would happen this time. I was obviously expecting a complete failure, so was rather surprised when the lights activated on command. I was even more surprised when the motor started turning. I had no idea why the loco now had power when it didn't when I first started. My suspicion is that the decoder wasn't originally seated in the decoder socket correctly, but I have no way of substantiating that. So, with everything working again, I decided to quit while I was ahead, and refitted the body shell. Right, so here's a quick running session of the Class 50, once again strutting its stuff on my test track. It's good to see it working again, despite it being a complete mystery as to why it stopped in the first place. Okay, so that's almost it for this update. What a brilliant community the model railway community is on YouTube, with everyone either trying to help or leaving messages of support for me to get the Class 50 running again. Thanks must also go to ngauge for confirming that I hadn't lost any parts from the bogie assembly. Getting the Class 50 working again has been my biggest loco servicing job to date, and has added to my confidence levels when it comes to taking locos apart, and more importantly, putting them back together again. I know there'll be those watching with much more experience than me wondering why I'm making such a big deal of this simple investigation, but we all have to start somewhere, and I just wanted to show that if I can do it, anyone can. With that said, do you service or fix your own locos, or do you send them away? If you fix your own, when did you realise that this was a possibility? What was the loco you started with, and was it a success? If you send your locos away, where do you send them? To the manufacturer, a service agent, or a third party? It would be great to have a list of good loco fixers and services. Alternatively, if you've got any hints, tips, useful tools or techniques to pass on to a fellow ngauge modeler, or if you simply want to say hello, then please do so in the comment section. Anything and everything you've got to say will be greatly appreciated. In the meantime, thanks ever so much for watching. Hopefully I'll have another update soon. Bye.